Tonight, as the wind howls beyond your window and the world grows quiet, I have a tale that bubbles with secrets and smoke. While you lay wrapped in warmth and lavender-scented sheets, imagine another time, when soap was not a luxury, but a gamble. When a single bar could smell like heaven or like a week-old stew. Tonight, we begin in a place where the air reeked of tallow and ambition. Come now, close your eyes, and let Santa tell you about the soap makers of the Middle Ages. In a crooked village pressed between the cold hills of northern France, the smell came before the smoke. It wasn't the comforting wood-fired aroma of stew or bread. No, this was different, sharper, thicker, the kind of smell that clung to your throat and stayed in your clothes. If you were unlucky enough to live downwind from the soap maker's hut, you'd swear the devil himself had built a kitchen there. The hut belonged to Alaric, a man with rough hands, a spine bowed from years of stirring thick vats, and a nose that hadn't worked properly since the fire of '43. No one in the village truly liked Alaric, but they liked being clean even less. And so, in a time when disease brewed in the corners of cobbled streets and lice found homes faster than children, Alaric became a necessary nuisance. Every morning, before the sun touched the chapel bell, Alaric walked to the slaughterhouse. There, for a few copper coins or a wedge of salted bread, he gathered the day's most precious ingredient, fat. Not the lean, healthy kind you might find on a merchant's table. This was tallow, thick, waxy chunks sliced from the carcasses of pigs, cows, and sometimes creatures no one cared to identify. He wrapped it in stained cloth, loaded it onto a wooden sled, and dragged it back to his hut with a grunt and a prayer. Inside, the process began. First, rendering. The fat had to be melted slowly and carefully, lest it scorch. Alaric stirred the bubbling mess with a stick nearly as tall as himself. It looked like stew, but the smell, oh, the smell, was enough to send most visitors fleeing. He welcomed no apprentices. No one lasted more than a day. Then came the ash. Alaric burned hardwood in an iron stove to make his own potash, a key ingredient in medieval soap. Mixed with water and strained through a cloth, the resulting lye was deadly if handled poorly. It could burn flesh and blind eyes, but to Alaric it was liquid gold. He measured carefully, adding the lye to the vat of hot fat. The mixture hissed, spat, and roared. Stirring too quickly meant disaster. Stirring too slowly meant wasted time. And time was money, even back then. Neighbors swore they saw colored flames dance from his chimney. Children dared each other to knock on his door and run. Some said Alaric spoke to his soap, whispered prayers or curses as it formed in the vat. Others believed he was part alchemist, part witch. In truth, Alaric was simply a craftsman, one of many across Europe who turned waste into cleanliness. Soap was not yet widespread. The church warned against too much bathing. Many believed dirt kept disease out. But nobles liked to smell pleasant, and monks liked clean hands, and so the soap maker stayed in business. After hours of cooking, the mixture thickened. Alaric poured it into wooden molds lined with cloth. There it would, cool and cure for days. The bars hardened like wax. Their color varied. Pale ivory if the fat was pure, greenish if mixed with herbs, yellow if stored too long. The final step, scenting. This was Alaric's pride. He foraged in nearby woods for lavender, rosemary, and thyme, crushed them into powder, and pressed them into the soft soap. For his wealthiest clients, he added animal musk or oils from distant lands. Those bars he wrapped in waxed linen and stamped with a carved wooden seal, a crude drawing of a flame over water. On market days, Alaric stood behind a small wooden cart. His hands, always stained and cracked, offered his wares with the same phrase, "Clean is costly, but filth'll cost you more." And people came, women in shawls, Children with copper coins, even passing clergy. They wrinkled their noses at his clothes but paid good silver for his soap. It was a strange sight. A man who stank of smoke and tallow, selling the promise of purity. Sometimes, after the last customer had left, Alaric would sit on the edge of his cart, holding a fresh bar between his palms. He'd raise it to his nose, inhale, not to test the scent, but to remind himself of the transformation, from death to life, from waste to worth, from fat to fire to foam. And so the cycle continued. As long as beasts were butchered and filth returned, men like Alaric were needed, not loved, not thanked, but needed. And in the corners of every town, behind the shops and the smells and the stained stone walls, the soapmakers stirred their vats by firelight. They were the silent cleaners of a filthy world, unknown, uncelebrated, and unforgettable. Tonight, as the embers settle in your fireplace and the hush of night folds around you like a blanket, I bring you deeper into the smoky world of the medieval soapmaker. You've seen the fat and the fire. But now, we turn to a stranger substance, ash. Not the gray dust you sweep from your hearth, but the alchemist's key. The secret behind the sting, the bubbles, and the burn. So breathe slow, and let Santa tell you what was hidden in the ashes. To most, ash was waste. The sad remains of yesterday's warmth. The soot that gathered in corners and blackened fingertips. But to Alaric, it was everything. After fire consumed the logs in his iron stove, what remained was not discarded. No, Alaric collected it carefully. Only white ash, only from seasoned. Hardwood, oak, beech, or ash tree itself. Softwood burned too fast, left nothing useful. Wet wood made smoke, not soap. He swept the ash into a deep clay basin, then poured water over it, slow and steady, until a pale liquid pooled at the bottom. This, lye water, was the most dangerous ingredient in his trade. It looked harmless. It smelled like wet stone, but it could eat through cloth, boil skin, blind an eye. Alaric tested it the way his grandfather had taught him. He dropped a raw egg into the liquid. If it floated, the lye was strong enough. If it sank, it was too weak. No weights, no numbers. Just folk wisdom and experience, passed down with scars and secrets. Many soap makers across Europe had their own recipes. In Italy, they mixed lye with olive oil. In Spain, they used goat fat and sea ash. But here, in this forgotten northern village, it was beef tallow and beech ash, boiled in the breath of winter, stirred with hands that no longer feared the burn. Alaric believed in the spirit of fire, not as a god, but as a force, alive, unpredictable, hungry. He claimed the soap would only set right if the flames were in the mood. He never boiled on feast days. He never used ash from a funeral pyre. He had rules, superstitions, some said. But his bars lathered better, lasted longer, and fetched higher coin. He stored his lye in glass bottles, rare, clouded, salvaged from a monastery cellar long ago. The villagers whispered about them. Some swore he had once been a monk expelled for witchcraft. Others said he simply paid well for broken relics. Whatever the truth, no one dared ask. Not directly. In the back of his hut stood a cabinet no one else touched. Inside, rows of jars labeled in a spidery hand. Holly ash, dry sept. Elm ash, poor for hard soap. Blackened beech, best when snow falls. And one labeled only, do not use. That jar remained sealed. One winter evening, a young boy from the village, curious and foolish, snuck in while Alaric was away. He lifted the forbidden jar, opened the wax-sealed lid, and took a single breath. The boy woke 3 days later, blind in one eye, with a blistered tongue. He never spoke again. Alaric said nothing. He simply moved the jar to a higher shelf and nailed the cabinet shut. To some, this confirmed what they already believed, that Alaric was half sorcerer, that his lie was cursed. But others saw the truth. The Soapmaker was not a magician. He was a chemist before the world had a word for chemistry. He understood reaction and ratio, heat and time. He knew which woods made better ash, which fats turned soft, which herbs cooled the burn. He didn't need Latin scrolls or cathedral blessings. His knowledge came from fire, failure, and flesh. And in that narrow hut, while snow clung to the eaves and rats scurried under floorboards, Alaric poured another bucket of lye. The liquid shimmered in the torchlight. A promise. A threat. He muttered an old rhyme under his breath. Ash for the burn, fat for the flame, water for blood, and soap for shame. Then he stirred, and the night swallowed the smell once more. Tonight, as the candle burns low and shadows stretch across your walls, let me take you beyond the boiling vats and into the homes of those who could afford the final product. Soap, you see, was never just about being clean. In the Middle Ages, it was a symbol of power, of wealth, of distance from filth. So close your eyes and listen, as Santa tells you who truly had the right to lather. In the early morning chill, long before the bell in the village chapel rang for Mass, the air was already thick with the scent of burning wood and rendered fat. But not everyone smelled it. In fact, not everyone wanted to. Most of the village preferred to keep a distance from the smoke curling out of Alaric's hut, associating it with superstition and stink. And yet, behind closed doors, in manors perched on gentle hills or within the cloisters of great abbeys, there was one thing no one wanted to do without: the soap he made. Among the peasants, bathing was rare, and when it happened, it was more for relief than cleanliness. A cold stream in the heat of summer, a shared wooden tub once a season. There was no soap involved, only water, maybe a handful of crushed mint or thyme, and a cloth. Dirt for the poor was a second skin. They wore it with resignation. To be clean was not just unnatural, it was to some suspicious. Only the dead were washed with care, scrubbed and scented before burial. To walk around smelling of rosemary or rose petals was to invite questions. What were you trying to hide? But in the cloistered world of monks and nuns, cleanliness took on a sacred quality. The monks of St. Remigius Abbey, just 2 miles east of Alaric's village, ordered soap regularly. Thin, pale bars with no scent, molded into humble rectangles, each stamped with a tiny cross. Father Remigius himself had met with Alaric once, years ago, and they had struck an arrangement. In exchange for regular deliveries, the abbey would provide wax, bits of parchment, and the occasional jug of preserved fruit. The monks did not bathe more frequently than others, but when they washed their hands before copying sacred texts or rinsed their faces before prayer, they did so with soap. To handle the word of God with greasy fingers was unthinkable. And then there were the nobles. In the manor house of Baroness Genevieve, high above the village on a knoll lined with cypress trees, the role of soap went far beyond utility. It was theater, a performance of wealth. Every Friday afternoon, without fail, the house's largest copper tub was hauled into her bathing chamber. Servants, usually 3, filled it with steaming water carried from the kitchen below, their backs bent, faces flushed. Before the Baroness entered, a 4th servant, a young girl named Elodie, would take a knife and carefully shave a bar of Alaric soap into thin curls, dropping them into the water as if seasoning a delicate stew. By the time the Baroness undressed and stepped into the bath, the surface shimmered with iridescent bubbles. It wasn't just about the feel of the water or the scent of the lavender and lemon balm. It was about what it meant. To possess such soap was to declare superiority. When guests arrived, Minor nobles, visiting abbots, the occasional merchant, they were offered small squares of the same soap wrapped in lace. It was the Baroness's favorite gift, a token that said, "You may never live like me, but for a moment you can smell like me." But even among nobles, not all were equal in their use. The Baron, for example, preferred harsher, muskier scents. His soaps were made with boar fat and scented with oak moss and sage. He often joked that flowery soaps were for women and the dying. His hunting companions would laugh and then quietly request their own bars the next week. In towns, wealthier, merchants began to emulate noble habits. Apothecaries in larger cities started stocking imported soaps from Italy and Spain, softer, sweeter, made with olive oil instead of animal fat. These foreign soaps were often pink, green, even blue, colored with crushed petals or minerals. Their cost was absurd. A single bar might equal a laborer's wages for a week. But still, they sold. Cleanliness was a new kind of currency, one that could be worn on the skin, and yet not everyone who used soap bought it. In the same village, where Alaric stirred his vats, there lived a midwife named Mariette. Older than most, with hands like knotty roots and eyes that missed nothing, she visited the hut once every few months, offering a jar of honey or a bundle of dried yarrow in exchange for a single bar. She used it not for herself, but for the newborns she delivered. "Let their first scent be clean," she'd say, tying the soap into a scrap of linen. Alaric never charged her. Among the poor, soap was often bartered, hoarded, or stolen. There were tales of thieves breaking into bathhouses not for coin, but for scraps of used soap. Small, rounded nubs tucked into pockets, treasured like gold. Mothers would slice a single bar into slivers, rationing it for months, using it to scrub laundry and rinse wounds. In those homes, the smell of soap was not associated with vanity. It was a sign of care, of effort, of someone refusing to surrender to the filth that the world insisted was their lot. And so, even as the church debated whether too much bathing encouraged sin, and physicians warned that opening the pores could invite disease, the quiet demand for soap grew. Alaric's client list expanded. A bishop's steward visited once. A tanner's wife came secretly at dusk. A foreign trader offered spices in exchange for 30 bars. Alaric refused, not for lack of interest, but because he could not keep. Up each bar took days to cure, weeks to perfect. He would never mass produce, never rush. The soap carried his name, even if spoken only in whispers. One winter, a visitor came from the capital, a man in fine boots, riding a dappled horse. He carried a letter bearing a wax seal and spoke with clipped vowels. He requested 6 bars, all identical, to be delivered to a distant estate within the month. Alaric shook his head. "I don't make soap for castles," he said. "I make it for skin." The man left unimpressed, but Alaric didn't care. He was not a merchant, he was not a servant. He was the keeper of a craft, one that turned the foul into the fragrant, 1 bar at a time. And so the line between clean and unclean remained, drawn not by morality or hygiene, but by wealth, status, and access. Soap was not just something you used. It was something you deserved. Or not. And while nobles bathed in perfumed tubs and monks washed before prayer, the rest of the world waited. Waited for the day when being clean might be a right, not a privilege. Until then, Alaric stirred. His vats and the world, 1 bar at a time, tried to scrub itself clean. Tonight, as the cold creeps through the cracks in your window and the fire sighs low in the hearth, let Santa tell you about pain. Not the kind that pierces, but the kind that lingers. The pain of craft, of danger carried in the fingertips, the breath, the skin. We've spoken of fat and fire, ash and pride, but not yet of the burn. Not yet of the price men paid to make the world a little cleaner. Alaric had no fingerprints. Years of lifting cauldrons, of scraping boiling tallow from Iron pots of mixing lye that sizzled like acid on flesh, they had stripped the ridges from his hands. His skin, once like any other man's, had grown thick and smooth like cured leather. He could touch coals and feel only warmth. He could pour lye with a bare palm and not wince, but not because it didn't hurt, because pain had long ago become the rhythm of his work. His hut was scorched in every corner. The beams above the stove were blackened with soot, the stone floor pitted with old burns. On the far wall, a single wooden plank bore the ghostly outline of a fire that had once leapt higher than it should have, a reminder of the year the batch had gone wrong, the night the mixture thickened too fast, too hot, and exploded upwards, like a demon clawing from the pot. Alaric had dodged left. The boy beside him, a curious apprentice named Jose, had not. Jose was 14, full of questions, eager hands. He had begged to learn the trade, saying his mother needed coin and his back was stronger than his mouth. Alaric had relented, eventually. On the third week, Jose forgot to seal the lye barrel after use. Rainwater crept in. The next morning, when they poured it into the fat, the mix reacted violently. It foamed, hissed, burst like boiling milk. Alaric pushed the boy aside, but not fast enough. The burns left him blind in one eye, and the side of his neck was marked with ridges that would never smooth. Jose never returned. No one else ever asked to learn. From then on, Alaric worked alone. Soap making was not noble work. It did not earn you applause or prayers. In most towns, the soapmaker lived on the edge of the map, of the market, of memory. He was tolerated, needed even, but rarely welcomed. The stench that clung to his clothes followed him into the chapel. People shifted away from him at Mass. Children held their breath as he passed. They whispered that his hands were cursed, that he had made a pact with something dark, that no one could live with that kind of fire and not be changed by it. But they still bought his soap. Accidents were common. A splash of raw lye on the forearm could eat through skin within seconds. If caught early, cold water might neutralize it. If not, the wound would fester, blacken, and sometimes, if the burn was deep, require the cutting away of flesh. Alaric kept a small knife near the fire, not for carving soap, but for those moments when there was no time to think, only to slice. There were days when the smoke was too thick, when the rendering of fat clogged the air, made his lungs ache, his breath thin. He coughed black for hours. In winter, with windows closed, the hut became an oven of toxins. But opening the door meant letting the cold in. And cold made the soap brittle, uneven, cracked before it cured. There were other dangers, too. Rats drawn by the smell of fat nested beneath the floorboards. They gnawed at the wood, skittered. Across shelves. Once, a mother rat drowned in a vat of cooling soap. Alaric didn't notice until it was too late. That entire batch was discarded. A week's labor gone with a splash, and yet he did not leave the trade. Not because he loved it, love had nothing to do with it, but because it was his craft, his burden, his small rebellion against the filth that ruled the world. He had learned early that no one else would make the world cleaner for him. If he wanted to live with dignity, he would have to boil it into the world himself. In the silence of night, long after the flames died down, Alaric often sat by the empty vats, fingers wrapped around a mug of weak ale. He stared at his hands, gnarled, darkened, incapable of softness, and wondered what they might have become in another life. A baker's hands? A wood carver's? A scribe's? But then he would hear the faint splash of water from the basin by the door, a bar of soap dropped by a mother rinsing her baby, the brush of foam, the scent of lavender he had mixed 3 days ago, now rising in the air like an apology, and he would smile. No one thanked the soap maker. No one brought him bread on feast days or invited him to weddings. But when they scrubbed dirt from their feet before entering the church, when they washed blood from their hands after harvest, when they bathed the dead before the final sleep, they used what he made, and that in its quiet way was enough. Still, every batch was a risk. Every morning he checked the lye, careful, not to breathe too deep. He stirred with the long stick, watching for signs of too much heat. One spark could turn the hut to ash. He had seen it happen in other towns. Soapmaker huts reduced to smoking holes, sometimes with the soapmaker still inside. There were no guilds to protect him, no union of craftsmen, no badge of honor. Only scars and knowledge and silence. The world, in all its noisy chaos, rarely noticed the men who made it bearable. But Alaric knew. He had burned for it, and each bar he shaped, cured, and wrapped was a small monument, not to cleanliness, but to endurance, to the hands that suffered so others could live a little softer. And so he worked, and the burn beneath the bubbles never left him. Tonight, as the night air settles still around your home and the moonlight spills gently across rooftops and stone, let Santa take you away from the smoke and vats for a moment and bring you to the noise of market stalls, to haggling voices, shuffling boots, and hands exchanging coin. For even a humble soap maker must sell, and selling in the Middle Ages was never simple. Every third Sunday, the village held its market. The square, normally silent but for church bells and chickens, burst into chaos, a beautiful kind of chaos. The scent of roasting onions mixed with that of manure. Peddlers from outlying farms set up stalls of turnips, wool, and dried herbs. A man from the south sold wine in clay jugs. A boy walked with a goose on a string. And near the western edge, where fewer passed, Alaric laid out his wares. He did not have a proper stall, no painted cloth, no sign with flair. Just a wide plank of wood resting across two barrels, and on it a small array of bars, square, round, oval, some plain, others wrapped in linen, tied with string, dusted with crushed thyme or rosemary. His display was neat, quiet, almost invisible next to the cries of fishmongers and sellers of trinkets who shouted like town criers. Alaric did not shout. He stood, arms folded, letting the soap speak for itself, or not speak, as was more often the case. Most villagers passed, him without pause. They had no coin for such luxuries. They rubbed themselves clean with sand or with boiled moss if they had the patience. But a few, just a few, stopped. A midwife, older and sharp-eyed, picked up a bar, sniffed it, nodded, placed it back. A merchant's wife asked if he had any with rose. He did not. She scoffed and walked on. A priest's servant bought 4, tucked them into his satchel, and told no one where they came from. There was no glamour in the sale. No trust, either. Some would accuse him of cutting the soap with clay to save fat. Others said he used old grease, the kind scraped from butcher, floors. One woman asked if he made his soap from dead animals left in the road. He did not answer. He'd learned long ago that trying to defend the work only made it sound worse. Then came the knockoffs. Around the 6th year of his market trade, another man arrived, a traveler from the west, short, round, smiling like a fox. His cart was larger, his words louder, and his soaps, pink, blue, green, scented with perfume so strong they could be smelled from 3 stalls away. He called them Venetian soap, said they were made with olive oil and rainwater from the Alps. His prices were higher, but people bought them. Not because they believed him, but because the bars looked beautiful. Alaric watched from a distance. He knew the signs. The bright colors were not from crushed petals, but from ground minerals, chalk, ochre, sometimes poisonous ones like cinnabar or malachite. The perfumes came not from herbs, but from spirits mixed with animal glands. The bars dissolved too. Fast, cracked in cold air, left skin itchy, but they smelled like royalty. One winter, a noblewoman rode into town for the Feast of St. Bridget. She stopped at Alaric's plank, looked over the rows, and picked up a plain ivory bar. "It smells like smoke," she said. "Not lavender." She turned to her steward. "We'll take the Venetian ones instead." Alaric said nothing. He packed the bar away. That day, he sold only 2. He began to notice others copying his methods. A tanner in the next village started selling herbal soaps that were nothing more than boiled fat and hay. A butcher's wife claimed she had learned Alaric's secret and made her own batch at home. It crumbled in the rain, but no one seemed to care. The word soap was enough. The market changed. People wanted softness, scent, status, not strength. Alaric's soaps were built to last. A single bar could survive a month of hard scrubbing. But that was no longer the measure. He once overheard a woman say, "If it doesn't smell like lilies, it isn't clean." And so he adapted, but only slightly. He began collecting lemon balm and marjoram in the spring. He planted rosemary behind his hut. He experimented with oils, infusing them into fat during rendering. He would not dye the bars. He would not cut the soap with chalk, but he gave them scent, real scent, soft and quiet, like the countryside after rain. He did not lower his price. He raised it, and slowly, customers returned. Not many, never many, but the right ones, midwives, healers, laundresses with coins saved from rich clients. A scholar from the city who washed only with Alaric's bars, claiming it soothed the skin and spirit both. Even Father Remigius began ordering by messenger instead of sending his novice. The Venetian man did not last. One spring, he vanished, cart and all. Some said he left for the capital. Others said he had poisoned a merchant's child with his perfume soap and fled. Either way, he was gone. But the memory remained. From that year forward, whenever someone new approached Alaric's stall and lifted a bar to their nose, they often asked, "Is this real?" And he would look them in the eye and say, "Smell it again." In a world of noise and lies, there was still something to be said for quiet truth. The market was never kind to Alaric. He was undercut, dismissed, mocked, ignored, but he returned every third Sunday. Not to get rich, he never did, not to gain fame. No one knew his name outside 3 towns. He came to remind the world, gently, firmly, that some things were still made with care. Even if no one saw the burns on his hands, even if no one thanked him, even if the soap sat untouched all morning, collecting dust while polished liars sold beauty from glass jars. Because at day's end, when the merchants packed up when the stew cooled, when the nobles rode back to their homes and the priests whispered final prayers, someone, somewhere, would unwrap one of his bars and lather their hands with silence and smoke and rosemary. And remember that cleanliness once came not from wealth or noise, but from fire. Tonight, as silence settles deeper than sleep and even the fire seems to breathe slower, let me tell you a story of blood. Not the kind that pumps through warm veins, but the kind that stains linen, pools on stone floors, and demands something stronger than prayer. In a time when medicine bled as much as it healed, there were men who believed in herbs, in leeches, in the alignment of stars, but even they, when pressed to the edge, came knocking on the door of a soapmaker. Alaric never claimed to be a healer. He had no jars of ground antler, no scrolls written in Latin. He did not wear blue wool robes like the city physicians, nor hang bells from his belt like the bone setters. His hut smelled of fat and smoke, not camphor or clove. But word travels in small villages, and pain has a way of cutting through pride. The first time it happened, the healer did not knock. It was early spring, just after the thaw. A boy had fallen from a cart and split his arm on a rusted blade. His Mother ran for the local apothecary, but he was away, called north to treat a nobleman's gout. The only one left was old Emmeline, a hedge witch with a crooked back and sharper tongue. She arrived with a bottle of alcohol and 3 strips of linen. When she peeled back the sleeve and saw the wound, swollen, oozing, crawling red up the arm like fire spreading through dry grass, she hesitated. Then she turned to the mother and muttered, "Fetch me soap." The mother did not ask from where. She ran. Alaric answered the door with bare arms, streaked in grease. When he saw the panic in her face, he did not speak. He simply stepped aside, reached into a chest, and pulled out a bar wrapped in cloth. No scent, no stamp, just soap, the kind he reserved for things that mattered. That night, Emmeline washed the boy's wound for half an hour before she poured the alcohol. He screamed, but by morning, the red lines had stopped crawling. By the end of the week, the fever had passed. No one said thank you, but a month later, Emmeline came herself. She brought dried sage and a flask of cider. "For trade," she said. Alaric nodded and handed her 3 bars. They never spoke of it again. After that, the visits came in trickles. A traveling barber surgeon, hands trembling after a failed amputation, begged for something to wash his blades. A midwife, covered in afterbirth and tears, asked for something to scrub her sleeves before visiting the church. A soldier, limping from a skirmish near the river, offered a gold button for enough soap to clean a wound he dared not show in daylight. They never called it medicine, never gave it dignity. Soap was not part of their canon. It had no roots, in Galen or Hippocrates. But when infection crept in, when prayers failed, when leeches drank and still the fever climbed, they came to Alaric. Some did so under cover of night. One autumn, a city doctor rode in on a horse too fine for the mud. Streets. He wore velvet and spoke in clipped syllables. He asked for a soap that would not burn, one that could be used inside the body. For washing tools, he clarified. When Alaric handed him a small batch made with goat fat and chamomile, the doctor sniffed it, frowned, and left without paying. A week later, he returned. Paid double, asked for more. Alaric never questioned what the soap was for, but he noticed the patterns. When sickness spread, his orders rose. When war came, even small local clashes between lords, he was asked to deliver larger bars. The same hands that carried swords would soon carry wounds, and wounds, they had learned, preferred to be cleaned with more than water. Of course, not everyone believed. There were still those who scoffed. A priest once warned him after Mass that placing too much faith in cleanliness was a sign of vanity. "Pain is for the soul," the priest said. "Suffering purifies." Alaric had said nothing. He did not mention the bar of soap wrapped beneath the priest's altar, the one used to wash the communion chalice. But not all danger came from infection. Sometimes the danger was pride. There was once a nobleman who suffered from festering, sores, red boils that cracked and bled no matter how many poultices were applied. His physicians prescribed fasting, then bloodletting, then leeches. Nothing worked. In desperation, a stable boy was sent to Alaric with strict instructions. No one must know where the soap came from. Alaric sent back a simple recipe: 3 parts goat tallow, 1 part ash lye, scented with crushed mint. Soak linens in boiling. Water, wash the skin gently each morning. Do not reuse cloth. Do not pray while cleaning. Just focus on the task. Within a fortnight, the nobleman's sores had dried. The stable boy returned to buy more. He whispered thanks. The nobleman never spoke Alaric's name aloud. But word reached other houses, and so the pattern deepened. The soapmaker's hut became, in quiet moments, a dispensary, a sanctuary, not for grand cures or miracles, but for something far rarer in that time: consistency. His soap did not lie. It did not promise salvation. It did not care whether the patient was peasant or prince. It simply cleaned, and in doing so, It gave the body a chance to do what it was built to do: heal. By now, Alaric had developed special bars for these uses. Harder bars with less fragrance, milder lye. He wrapped them in waxed cloth and marked them with a small cross. He never sold them at market, only from the door. He also began storing clean cloth. Not much, just a stack, boiled in rainwater, dried in sunlight, untouched by rats. When someone came in need, he would offer the cloth, a bar, and nothing more. No advice, no blessing, just tools. Some said that made him cold. But those who returned, healed, whole, never said so. They brought eggs. They brought coins. One brought a carved whistle. Another, a song. The currency was different every time. Alaric accepted it all. Not because he needed it, but because it meant they had survived long enough to bring something back. Medicine in. The Middle Ages was a strange theater, part science, part theater, part luck. But within its flickering shadows, there was room for a quiet man who boiled fat and stirred ash, who never claimed to heal, but often did. The thorns of superstition could not choke the root of usefulness. And so they came. They always came. And Alaric, without fanfare or faith, gave them what they needed: soap. Tonight, as the crickets quiet, as the world exhales in stillness, Santa will tell you of silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence left behind when something dependable vanishes. We think the world will always give us what we need: warmth, bread, light, the smell of clean cloth. But sometimes the fire goes out, and when it does, we realize who was tending it all along. The fire in Alaric's hut had burned for 19 winters without rest. Even in summer, when other stoves lay dormant, his flames danced, boiling fat, curing soap, licking the iron belly of his rendering pots. Some nights, the villagers swore they could see the glow from the far edge of the chapel roof. It was a kind of lighthouse, though no one said so aloud. You didn't look at it. You didn't talk about it, but you expected it to be there. Then came the dry summer. The rains never came. The river shrank to a trickle. The fields yellowed, cracked. Grass snapped underfoot like straw. One careless spark in the forest west of the village became a blaze. 3 cottages lost, 2 oxen dead. The priest called it a sign. The council called it a warning. A decree was issued. No open flame within the village boundaries until the risk had passed. Fires were permitted only for cooking, under supervision, at the communal hearth. No private stoves, no charcoal pits, no smoke by day, no embers by night. Alaric read the notice twice. Then he folded it into a square, tucked it into the crook of the wooden beam above his stove, and let the fire die. The silence came fast. The bubbling vat stilled first. Then the iron pot cooled, its black belly crusting over with a waxy ring. The scent of fat in the air faded. The soot on the walls stood still, as if waiting. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the hut did not smell like anything. Alaric sat on his stool and listened. Outside, the birds chirped, the wind blew dust across the grass, and someone sneezed. But inside, there was nothing. No hiss, no crackle, no quiet hum of heat working. Just the groan of the old floorboard beneath his heel and the faint sound of breath through his nose. He did not panic. He did not curse. He simply stopped. At the market that week, he came with nothing. His plank was bare. He stood behind it anyway. The fishmonger asked if he was ill. A baker's boy tried to sell him a new pot, thinking he'd lost his to rust. A merchant's wife looked at his empty table and frowned. "Are you closing?" she asked. "Did someone finally make better soap?" Alaric said nothing, but others noticed. The laundress who scrubbed the altar cloths found her hands raw after a week without the bars he'd always made for her. The midwife tried washing with ashes and nearly fainted from the smell. A barber surgeon asked around the village, and upon learning of the fire ban, rode 2 towns over to find a replacement, only to return with soft pink soap that turned to mush in a day. Even the abbey sent a messenger. Father Remigius wrote with concern, not for Alaric's health, but for the supply. "The hands of the Lord must remain clean," he wrote. "Send 12 bars at earliest convenience." Alaric did not reply. He had never felt idle before. In Ayadors, the early years, when batches took longer, when herbs didn't dry in time, when he fell sick once or twice, the work slowed, but it never stopped. This was different. This was a stillness that settled into the bones. He walked the perimeter of the hut like a ghost. He rearranged jars. He sharpened his blade. He scrubbed the bench, then scrubbed it again. The fire remained cold. On the 5th day, someone knocked. It was Elodie, the Baroness's former servant, now married, 3 children, but still walking. With the same quick steps and sharp eyes, she stood at the door holding a bundle of linen and a small satchel of dried mint. "They asked me to come," she said. "The baby's sick. They need soap." Alaric gestured to the hearth. "No fire," he said. She looked at it, then at him. "You can't make any?" she asked. He shook his head. She stood silently for a moment. Then she set the mint down and left. The next morning, she returned with 2 other women, the midwife and the miller's wife. Between them, they carried a bucket of water, a bag of dry kindling, and a small brass pot. "The council said we can cook," Elodie said. "So, we'll cook." They built the fire behind the hut, just beyond the village edge where the trees hadn't caught yet. A boy was posted to watch the smoke. A man from the chapel loaned a shovel for ash control. Alaric stood by, arms folded. They asked nothing of him, only that he instruct. He hesitated, then nodded. The vat was smaller, the batch uneven. The mint was crushed too fine. But when the mixture began to bubble, when the scent of tallow and herbs returned, something in Alaric's chest moved. Not pain, not pride, something in between. By dusk, they poured the soap into old wooden molds and set it to cure in the shade. It would take a week, maybe longer, but it was something. When they left, the midwife pressed a loaf of bread into Alaric's hands. "For your trouble," she said. He didn't tell her he hadn't lifted a finger. He kept the bread. That night, the fire stayed dark in his stove, but behind the hut it still smoldered, watched, tended, shared, and in the quiet, Alaric sat on his stool, sniffed the edge of his sleeve, and smiled. The fire had gone out, but the work had not. Tonight, as your breathing softens and the world grows distant, let me tell you not of work or danger, not of fire or fact, but of memory. For even the most hardened hands were once small and soft, once clumsy and curious, and even the loneliest. Tradesmen may find, too late, that he was never truly alone. The fire had stayed out for 3 more days after the village helped him. The decree still stood, but no one questioned the quiet heat smoldering behind Alaric's hut. The batch they made was good, uneven in shape but firm in hand, and it cured faster than expected. The midwife returned first, then the laundress. By the end of the week, 5 more had come by to ask, not buy, and Alaric, for reasons he couldn't quite name, let them sit and watch. He didn't teach them, not formally. He didn't write recipes, or list measurements, or speak in clear instructions. He simply moved the way he always had, and let them stand near enough to see. Most came once, wrinkled their noses, and never returned. But one did not. The boy's name was Jurij, 11, maybe 12, son of the blacksmith's brother, or perhaps the baker's cousin. Alaric wasn't sure. He had a thin neck, quick, fingers, and a habit of tilting his head whenever Alaric stirred the pot, as if listening for something no one else could hear. He didn't speak much, just watched. Every afternoon, after chores, he appeared near the hut's rear wall and stood, with his back straight, arms behind him. When Alaric carried water, he followed. When Alaric measured lye, he squinted and sniffed. When Alaric poured the thickened mixture into molds, the boy's mouth tightened as though holding back a question. On the fourth day, Alaric handed him a cloth. "Wipe the bench," he said. The boy nodded and obeyed. And just like that, the rhythm shifted. It was not that Alaric needed help. His hands still worked, his back still held, but something in the air, or perhaps in his own bones, had begun to change. The silence that once comforted him now felt heavier. The tools in his hut felt colder. The fire felt thinner, not weaker, just aware of its age. That night he dreamed of smoke. Not thick, oily smoke from burning fat, but sweet white smoke from pine and applewood. It curled around a man's silhouette, tall, thin, with a crooked left wrist and a voice like split bark. "Too hot," the man said. "You'll ruin it." Alaric, younger in the dream, turned and muttered, "I stirred it slow." Not slow enough. He hadn't seen that face in 40 years. His teacher, his first fire, a man named Brannock, who had lived near the sea, where the wind never stopped and the ash blew sideways into your eyes. Brannock had taken him in after a fever, left him orphaned, not with kindness. The man had no soft edges, but with a bowl of soup and a place by the fire. The first thing he taught wasn't soap. It was silence. "Stir when you're ready," Brannock had said. "Not when they ask, not when they shout, when you know." And stir he had, for years, until the day Brannock coughed up blood and sent him to the market alone. When Alaric returned, the hut was cold. The vats were empty. The bench was clean. He never said goodbye. Alaric awoke before dawn, the dream lingering like ash in his mouth. He lit the fire, slower than usual. He placed a small pot on the stove, not to make soap, just to boil water for tea. He didn't drink tea. But today, it felt right. When Jurij arrived that afternoon, Alaric handed him a stick. Thick, smooth, slightly scorched at one end. "Stir this," he said. "Slow. Don't scrape the bottom. Let the heat tell you where to stop." The boy didn't speak. He just stepped forward and obeyed. The batch was small, maybe 6 bars worth, but the process was clean. The boy's hands shook. He flinched when the lye hissed, but he didn't run. They poured together. The mold was old, cracked slightly at one edge. Alaric patched it with wax. The boy asked, finally, "Why don't you just make a new one?" Alaric paused, then smiled. "Because it still works." And the boy nodded, as if that answer explained everything. That night, Alaric sat by the cured soaps, 3 rows, 20 bars, all resting beneath linen, and thought of Brannock's bench. He thought of the first time he stirred, the first time he scorched a batch, the first time he bled from a lye burn and didn't cry. He thought of all the things he had never said. He wondered if silence had truly been a virtue, or just a wall he never knew how to climb. The next morning he called Jurij earlier, gave him the knife to trim the bars. The child's hands were unsure, but the edges came out straight enough. Then he spoke, not long, not loud, just a story about a fire in a coastal town and a man who stirred with a crooked wrist. Jurij listened, asked nothing, but when he packed the finished bars into a sack, he paused and looked at Alaric. "Will you teach me to light the fire?" And Alaric, after a long breath, answered, "Yes, but not today. Today they worked. Tomorrow perhaps they would build. Because something had changed. The fire had come back, but this time it would not burn alone. Tonight. As the stars blink quietly in their ancient rhythm and the world turns just a little slower, Santa will tell you of beginnings, not the kind born in triumph, but in small pain and persistence. For even the finest craftsman once burned his hand. Even the steadiest stirred too fast. And every tradition, no matter how old, begins again each time a young hand picks up an old tool. The days had grown warmer. Rain returned, soft and steady, waking the grass and swelling the river's edge. The fire ban was lifted. Alaric's chimney smoked again. Thin, sure lines against the morning sky, curling like signatures on an invisible page. Jurij now came daily. He no longer waited behind the hut. He walked in through the front, still quiet, still careful, but with the familiarity of someone who had found a rhythm. Alaric didn't greet him. He didn't need to. The bench was cleaned. The molds checked, the pot filled with water. They moved in step, wordless at first, then sometimes with small nods or questions. Too hot? No. Keep stirring. More ash? Wait, let it settle. That morning, Alaric stood back. Light the fire, he said. Jurij froze for a moment, then moved. He stacked the wood, checked the flue, struck the flint. It took 3 tries, but the flame caught. He watched it for too long, mesmerized, until Alaric nudged his shoulder. Fire's not for watching. It's for working. They started small, rendering fat from beef scraps given by the butcher. Jurij gagged once, the smell rising thick and sweet, coating the throat, but didn't leave. He stirred. He skimmed. He wiped sweat from his brow with a sleeve he forgot was oily. Then came the ash. Alaric taught him to collect only the white, to sift with cloth, to add water slowly. They let it settle overnight, then filtered the lye. Jurij held the egg in shaking hands. If it floats, Alaric asked. It's strong enough, the boy replied. And if it sinks, too weak. Add more ash. Alaric grunted his approval. By the 5th batch, the boy was confident. Too confident. He lifted the pot of lye too fast. It splashed. Just a drop. No more than the size of a bead, but it landed on the soft inside of his forearm. He didn't scream. He hissed in breath, dropped the pot, and staggered back. Alaric was already moving. He grabbed the boy's arm, pulled him to the basin, and plunged it into cold water. Jurij clenched his teeth. His eyes watered. It stings, he gasped. It's supposed to, Alaric said. That's how it tells you it's working. They sat in silence. The wound wasn't deep. Red, angry, but not blistered. Still, it would leave a mark. Alaric wrapped it in cloth. You'll never make soap without scars, he said, not unkindly. But now, you'll learn where to stand. Jurij nodded. That night, he didn't return home until well after dark. The next morning, he came early, with his arm bandaged and a face set like stone. Alaric said nothing. The villagers began to notice. The baker's wife saw the boy carrying a bag of lye-soaked cloth and frowned. That's the soapmaker's job, she muttered. What's that boy know? A merchant asked at market if Alaric was retiring. The old man finally taking on a replacement? He said with a smirk. Even Father Remigius raised an eyebrow when the next batch arrived bearing a new scent, juniper and bay. Unusual, he said. Not unpleasant, but new. Alaric shrugged. Hands change. Soap stays clean. And he turned away. Jurij heard whispers. Children teased. One day, someone scratched the word "fat boy" into the door of the hut. Childish, crude, but enough to make the boy's cheeks flush. Alaric sanded the door that evening. He didn't speak of it. Instead, the next day, he told the boy to make a batch on his own. Start to finish, he said. No help, I'll watch. but I won't touch. Jurij looked terrified, but he nodded. He lit the fire, rendered the fat, not too fast, not too hot, filtered the ash, floated the egg, stirred in silence. When the mixture hissed, he backed away. When it bubbled, he leaned in. His face was set, sweat beading at his hairline, but his hands stayed steady. He poured into the molds without spilling, then turned to Alaric. The old man gave a single nod. Jurij sat on the floor, exhausted. Not from the labor, but from the weight of doing. It alone. The soap cured 3 days later. Alaric tested it. It lathered fast. It held its shape. It smelled like a cold morning near the sea. He left 1 bar at the market stall. No label, no explanation. A woman bought it without asking. Returned 2 days later and asked for more. Alaric pointed to Jurij. Ask him. The boy blinked. The woman looked doubtful, but she asked. And he answered. That night, Jurij didn't go home right away. He sat on the bench beside the hearth, holding a scrap of cured soap in his palm, turning it over. It's not perfect, he said. Alaric looked at him. Neither am I. And they sat in the quiet. The fire cracked once, then again. And somewhere in the dark, a new story was beginning. Tonight, as your breath slows and the fire dims to a soft glow, Santa will tell you not of work or fire or even learning, but of trust. The kind of trust that passes silently, without ceremony, without applause. Sometimes, the most sacred moments come not when someone shows their strength, but when they admit they must rest. The wind had changed that morning. It came down from the hills, sharp and restless, carrying the edge of rain and something colder beneath. The kind of wind that crawled through shutters and into bones. The kind that didn't ask if you were ready. Jurij arrived early, as he had for weeks now. He walked the worn path past the frost-bitten herbs, ducked under the crooked beam of the hut's doorway, and paused. The fire was out. The pot was empty. Alaric was not at the stove, nor at the bench, nor sorting jars in the back. He was on the chair, the old one with the splintered leg, wrapped in a rough wool blanket, his body folded inward like a burnt scroll. His breathing was audible, not labored, but deeper than usual. His eyes opened as the boy stepped in. Storm's coming, Alaric said. Jurij nodded. You sick? He asked, almost too quietly. Not yet, Alaric replied, but close enough. The boy hovered by the door. Alaric's hand emerged from the blanket, fingers pointing to the pot. Make a batch, he said. Small, clean, use the good fat, the rosemary too. Jurij blinked. Alone? He asked. Alaric's eyes closed. You've seen me do it, he said. Do it the same. No further instruction. No watchful eye, no guiding voice. Just 4 words and silence. Jurij moved without thinking. He fetched the wood, stacked it with trembling hands. The flint slipped twice before the spark caught. He fed the flame slowly, carefully, remembering how Alaric never rushed this part. The fire bloomed. He filled the pot, rendered the fat. It melted unevenly at first. Too hot on one side, too slow on the other. He adjusted the logs beneath, shifted the pot with the hooked iron rod, stirred in slow figure eights. He added ash water, waited, tested the lye with an egg. It floated, barely. He hesitated, then added a pinch more ash, strained again. The lye turned from pale to cloudy. This time the egg sat higher. He smiled. He didn't notice when the sun broke through the clouds, spilling soft light across the bench. He added lye to fat, slowly, whispering the rhyme under his breath. Ash for the burn, fat for the flame, water for blood, and soap for shame. The mixture hissed. He stirred gently, watching for the shift. That moment when the brew thickened, changed color, told you it was ready to mold. His hands were steady now. His back ached. but he didn't stop. From the chair, Alaric said nothing. His breathing remained slow, steady. Gervais poured the soap into the old molds. One cracked slightly. He patched it with wax, just like he'd seen Alaric do. The bars settled with a soft plop. He covered them with cloth. The fire he let die naturally. Then he sat. The room was quiet. The scent of rosemary rose slowly, curling, into the air like a benediction. Alaric stirred. "Did you burn it?" he asked. "No," Gervais said. "Too much ash?" "No." "Too little fat?" "No." Silence. Then, from beneath the blanket, came a sound Gervais had never heard before. Laugh, small, dry, like firewood splitting. "Good," Alaric said. "Then I can sleep." And he did. Gervais stayed until sunset. He swept the floor, folded the linens, scrubbed the stirring stick clean. Before he left, he placed a bar, just one, on the shelf by the window. When Alaric woke the next morning, the hut smelled like rosemary and wood smoke. He did not rise right away. He lay there, staring at the beam above the stove, where the firelight had always danced. It still danced. He turned his head. The bar was cured, smooth, cut with a careful hand. He reached for it, turned it over once, and smiled. The fire had not gone out. Not really. It had simply moved, from one pair of hands to another. And this time, it would not die with him. Tonight, as your room grows still and the hush of night deepens like a soft blanket, let Santa tell you of endings. Quiet ones, gentle ones. Not all endings come with farewells or tears. Some arrive like the setting sun, slow, warm, and full of meaning. This is the story of a man, a boy, and a bar of soap that would outlast them both. Years had passed since Gervais first stepped across the soot-dark threshold of Alaric's hut. He no longer flinched at the smell of fat, no longer hesitated when stirring lye. His hands bore small scars, the kind that only come from knowing exactly where to touch and where not to. The villagers no longer whispered about the boy. They came to him openly now. The baker's wife called him Master Gervais, half in jest, half in truth. Even Father Remigius sent his orders with notes that read, "As before, your rosemary blend, if it's ready," and Alaric sat. He no longer worked the fire. His legs had grown stiff, his breath shallower. But every morning, he took his place on the stool near the window, a patch of sun just wide enough to warm his knees. From there, he watched, not to instruct, not to correct, just to see. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes he slept. Gervais never rushed the work. He still made soap in small batches, still stirred by hand, still trimmed each bar with the old iron knife. But now, he made more than just soap. He made decisions. He mixed new herbs. He tested new shapes. But never once did he change the old wooden shelf above the stove or the rack of molds carved by Alaric's hand. Some things weren't his to replace. One morning, when the sky was the color of pewter and the wind moved like breath beneath the door, Alaric spoke first. "Do you know which was my first bar?" he asked. Gervais turned from the bench, surprised. "The first you ever made?" he asked. Alaric nodded slowly. "It was poured into a cracked mold. One Brannock gave me, said it wasn't worth patching. I used it anyway." He pointed, not to a shelf, but to the small trunk near the hearth. Inside, beneath wax cloth and faded herbs, lay a block of dark wood. Carved in the center was a faint symbol, a flame over water. The first mark Alaric had ever used. "I kept it," he said. "Never used it again, but never threw it out." Gervais lifted the mold with reverence. It was heavier than he expected. The crack had been sealed with wax and thread, long hardened. One corner was chipped, but it was clean. "Ready. Make one," Alaric said. For me. Gervais didn't ask what scent. He didn't ask how big. He simply lit the fire and began. He chose goat tallow. Cleaner, smoother, less smoke. He added rosemary, of course, and just a pinch of juniper. Not much. Enough to remind the nose of rain on stone. The ash came from the applewood tree behind the hut, the one Alaric used to lean against in warmer months. Gervais strained the lye with cloth stitched by his own hands, a gift from Elodie's daughter, who now traded soap for honey. Alaric watched the whole time, silent. The batch was small, just enough for one bar. Gervais stirred slow, steady. When the mixture changed color, he didn't smile. He didn't look for praise. He simply poured, carefully, into the old mold. The soap settled with a soft sigh. That night, the hut held its breath. No fire crackled. No pots clanged. Just the scent of something ancient and new. By morning, the bar had cured just enough to hold its shape. Gervais unwrapped it, trimmed the edge, rubbed a thumb across the top. He placed it. Beside Alaric's hand, the old man opened his eyes. He looked at the soap, then at Gervais. It's not perfect, the boy said. Alaric nodded. Good, he whispered. It shouldn't be. He held the bar a moment longer, then set it on the windowsill where the sun could warm it. Gervais turned to stoke the fire. Behind him, Alaric exhaled, not in pain, not in struggle, just release. When Gervais turned again, the old man was still. The bar of soap remained on the windowsill. The fire crackled gently, and outside, the wind softened. There was no funeral. Alaric had left no will, no instruction, no heirs but the boy. The villagers came quietly. They left flowers. A woman from the next town brought a bottle of wine and said, "He once saved my child, with a bar this big." She held up her fingers, a smile trembling on her lips. Gervais did not cry. Not then. He buried Alaric beneath the applewood tree, near where the first fire had once been lit. He marked the grave with a simple stone. No words, just a carved symbol, a flame over water. The hut stayed the same. The tools remained. The fire never stopped. And every spring, Gervais made one small bar. Goat fat, rosemary, juniper, apple ash. He poured it into the cracked old mold and placed it on the windowsill, just in case the old man ever came back to check. Tonight. As you lie still beneath soft blankets and the last embers sigh in your hearth, Santa will tell you of circles, not the ones drawn in chalk or carved in stone, but the quiet, invisible ones that life traces in our days. A boy once stood in silence, watching an old man stir soap. Now, years later, the boy is grown, and another pair of eyes has come to watch. The hut looked almost the same. The wooden beam above the fire still bore soot marks from long ago. The molds sat neatly in their rack. The cracked one, Alaric's first, remained in its place, though only used once a year. The old chair near the window had a new cushion, but still creaked the same. Gervais had changed little. He'd grown taller, broader, slower in movement, but no less sure. His beard was streaked with ash gray now, though his hands stayed steady. He still made soap as he had been taught, small batches, hand-stirred, using only what the land gave freely. No merchant blends, no perfumed oils from the south. Just fat, ash, water, and time. And silence. Until the day the girl appeared. She didn't knock, didn't speak. She simply stood at the door, thin as a willow branch, hair in loose braids, eyes dark and too serious for her age. Gervais noticed her from the corner of his eye as he stirred. She said nothing. He said nothing. After a while, she left. The next day, she returned. She stood closer this time, just inside the doorframe, hands clasped behind her back. "Fire's hot," he muttered, not looking up. She nodded. Another day passed, then another. On the fourth visit, she spoke. "What's that smell?" "Mint," he replied, "and lemon balm." "It smells like my grandmother's scarf." He didn't answer, but he didn't ask her to leave either. She came every day after that, never late, never loud. She didn't ask to touch, she didn't interrupt. She simply watched, eyes tracking the motion of his hands, the flicker of the fire, the shifting of the soap from liquid to thickened mass. Her name, he learned, was Maëlle. Her father was the cooper. Her mother wove baskets. She had 4 siblings, none of whom cared where she went as long as she returned before supper. "Do you like soap?" Jurij asked one morning, as he ground rosemary with a mortar and pestle. "I like how it smells," she said, "and how it feels. Most people just like how it sells." She shrugged. Jurij studied her from behind the steam rising off the vat. There was a stillness in her, not of laziness, but of attention, the same kind Alaric had once seen in him, that strange, rare calm in the young, not born from knowing everything, but from wanting to. The next morning, she arrived early. He had barely lit the fire. He handed her a piece of cloth. "Wipe that bench," he said. She blinked. "Why?" "Because it's dusty." She did as told. Later that day, he gave her a small stick, not to stir with, but to press air bubbles out of the curing soap. She didn't ask questions, but her fingers moved gently. He began leaving small tasks undone, letting her find them. She noticed a jar left unsealed, a cloth needing to be boiled. Each time she fixed it, silently, as if it had always been hers to do. And then, one evening, she didn't come. The fire burned quietly. The fat bubbled. The scent of thyme filled the hut. But the doorway stayed empty. Jurij found himself glancing over his shoulder, once, twice, then scolding himself for it. The next morning she returned. He didn't ask why she was gone. She didn't say, but she walked in, picked up the broom, and swept the corner behind the fire without being told. That afternoon, he stopped stirring. He set the long wooden stick down on the bench. It made a soft tap. She looked at him. He nodded to the pot. "Your turn." Her eyes widened. He said nothing more. She stepped forward, both hands on the stick. He watched her shoulders, the way they tensed, then eased. She stirred clockwise, slow, steady. When the mixture thickened, she hesitated. He nodded again. She poured. Not perfectly. It splashed slightly, but it filled the mold cleanly. He covered it with cloth and said, "Not bad." She smiled. That night, Jurij sat by the fire longer than usual. He remembered the weight of Alaric's silence, the way it had held him steady even when the world felt unshaped. And now, in that same quiet, another child had picked up the thread. Not his daughter. Not his blood, but his heir. Not in name, in flame. Tonight, as the wind whispers low and the night folds gently around your thoughts, let Santa tell you of mistakes, not the kind that break bones or burn bridges, but the kind that soften pride, temper hands, and mark the first true step toward mastery. Every apprentice must fail. Every fire must flicker. What matters is what comes after. It had been 6 weeks since Maëlle first touched the stirring stick. In that time, she had ground herbs, trimmed cured bars, wiped down the bench without being asked, and twice poured a batch of soap with no corrections. She worked quietly, steadily, with the focus of someone older than her years. Jurij rarely offered praise, but he also no longer checked her measurements when she worked. That, she knew, meant something. So when he said one gray morning, "Do a batch alone today," she didn't blink. He handed her the keys to the cabinet of ingredients. She tied her apron tighter, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. He did not leave the hut, simply sat by the window with a small knife, whittling wood as the scent of fat began to rise. She moved with confidence. The fire lit on the first strike. The water boiled evenly. She rendered beef tallow, her favorite, for its soft golden color. She strained ash from the hearth, though she didn't notice it had come from a pile meant for firewood, not soap making. The logs had been damp when burned. The ash was dark, gritty, but she didn't question it. She tested the lye with an egg. It floated, barely. She stirred, adjusted, tested again. The egg bobbed unevenly, but she remembered what Jurij once said, "If it floats, it works." So she went ahead. She added the lye to the fat. It hissed, frothed. She stirred and stirred and stirred. Nothing changed. The mix stayed thin, oily, stubborn, refusing to thicken. She kept stirring, lips pressed into a line. 30 minutes, then an hour. Her arms ached. The fire dipped. She added more wood, stirred again, still thin. She added dried thyme, a pinch of mint. Perhaps scent would help. Nothing. Finally, she poured the mix into molds. Maybe, just maybe, it would settle overnight. The next morning, she arrived early. The molds were cold, but not set. The mixture sloshed, watery, half solid, like soup that had curdled in the bowl. Her heart dropped. She tried to lift one bar. It fell apart in her hands. She scraped it back in, smoothed it with a spoon, covered it again. She did not tell Jurij. For the rest of the day, she worked quietly, eyes lowered, cheeks hot. On the second morning, the soap was still soft. She tried adding salt to one mold. It bubbled strangely, turned gray. By the third day, the entire batch smelled sour. She sat on the floor of the hut, back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. She wanted to disappear into the stone, into the ash, into the fire that had once made her proud and now only made her feel small. She left before Jurij arrived. The next morning, she did not come, nor the one after. On the fourth day, Jurij walked to her house. Her mother opened the door. Behind her, Maël sat at the table, staring at her empty hands. Jurij said nothing. He held out a small cloth-wrapped package. She didn't move. "It's not finished," she whispered. "I ruined it." "I know," he said. She looked up. "I used the wrong ash." He nodded. "I didn't tell you because I thought you'd be angry." He didn't smile. He didn't scold. He simply stepped forward, placed the bundle on the table, and unwrapped it. Inside was one of the ruined bars, still soft, slightly misshapen. He handed it to her. "Take this," he said, and scrubbed the benches. She frowned. "It won't. Clean." He looked at her. Lye is still lye, even when it fails to hold shape. The fat still lifts grease, even when it doesn't look pretty. She blinked. "Lan Jouta Lam Hong," he said, switching to the soft rhythm of memory. "Data bata kosach noi bangchin tu sa fong jo." Her lips twitched. "You cleaned with the mistake?" "I scrubbed for hours." She held the bar. It wobbled slightly in her hand. It was cold, but not useless. She looked up. "Can I try again?" He stepped back. The fire's still warm. That afternoon, the hut smelled of mint again, not sweet and proud, but humble, quiet. The smell of someone beginning again, and this time, the mixture thickened, and the bar held. Tonight. As the moon leans gently against the dark sky and the world grows still beneath its weight, let Santa tell you about remembering, not with tears or with songs, but with silence. There comes a moment when the past reaches forward, not to pull you back, but to let you go. And in that letting go, something beautiful stays. The fire was already lit when Jurij entered the hut. He paused at the door, surprised not by the light, but by the rhythm. It was familiar, the gentle crackling of dry wood, the hum of heat warming the stones, the soft whistle of fat beginning to melt. The kind of rhythm that doesn't come from instructions. It comes from knowing. Mayel stood by the stove, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, eyes downcast as she stirred the first pot of the morning. She didn't notice him at first. She was testing temperature with her palm held above the iron, just as he'd taught her. Adjusting the flame with a twist of a stick. Her motions were calm, careful. She didn't flinch when the fat hissed. Jurij walked past her without a word and took his seat by the window. The light spilled over the ledge, painting the old floorboards gold. Outside, the trees leaned gently in the breeze. Inside, the hut was still, except for her. He watched her as she moved, the way she reached for the herb jar without looking, the way she tapped the rim of the mortar after grinding, the way she held the stirring stick close to the center, not the end, for better balance. He had not shown her that. She had learned it on her own. And yet, she looked just like someone. He remembered, Alaric, not in face, not in form, but in quiet. In the way her body curved around the fire, slightly tilted like a branch that had grown toward light. The way she stirred without watching the pot, listening to the sound, the weight. The change in texture, it was a stillness he hadn't realized he missed. The scent of rosemary and beech ash filled the air. Jurij leaned his elbows on his knees and let the scent wrap around him. In his mind, it was 20 years ago. The pot was bigger, the hands older, the floor darker from soot. Alaric stood exactly where Mayel now did, arms folded, back hunched slightly, watching a boy sweat over a batch gone thick too soon. He remembered the way Alaric cleared his throat before giving advice. How he never smiled unless something went wrong and got fixed. The way he handed tools without looking. The way he once said, "If the soap turns gray, let it. Gray still cleans." It had been a long time since Jurij thought of those words. Now, Mayel was pouring lye, slow, steady, lips moving in silent count. When the mixture hissed, she stepped back, waited, then stirred. She didn't check the clock. There was no clock. But she knew. Jurij looked down at his hands. They weren't as quick as they'd been. The skin was drier now, knuckles swollen. His grip wasn't as sure. The knife sometimes slipped if he didn't concentrate. He had begun sleeping more, waking later. He was not old, but he was older. And as he sat there, in the chair once used by his teacher, in the hut he'd once inherited through fire and ash, he felt for the first time not responsible, but released. Mayel didn't need watching anymore. She wasn't mimicking, she was making. He leaned his head back against the wood and closed his eyes. Not to sleep, just to listen, to the stir, the scrape, the soft sound of soap thickening. It was the same song he'd heard all his life, and now it belonged to someone else. He didn't mind. The room smelled like Alaric's last bar, goat fat, rosemary, juniper, but lighter, cleaner, brighter somehow. Mayel poured the batch. There was a soft splash. Then the cloth was laid over. The mold. Only then did she glance toward him. He opened his eyes. She said nothing. He nodded once. She smiled. He didn't speak again for the rest of the morning. Nor did she. They worked in parallel. He cutting the cured bars from yesterday, she washing the tools. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of memory, of trust, of something passing without needing to be said. That evening, after she'd gone, Jurij sat alone by the fire. The coals glowed softly. warm but no longer roaring. He reached for the stirring stick, ran his fingers along its edge, then set it back down. The hut was quiet, the fire low. And for the first time, Jurij realized he no longer feared the day he would stop, because the fire would not. Tonight, as the village sleeps and your thoughts settle like dust on old stone, Santa will tell you of a first step. Not the kind marked by drums or trumpets, but the quiet kind. A girl with a basket, a breath held tight, and a patch of sun waiting at the end of a long road. There are moments in life that pass like any other day. But when remembered, they burn brighter than fire. The morning came early, golden and still. Outside the hut, dew clung to the grass like glass beads. Inside, the coals glowed soft in the hearth. Maëlle moved carefully, wrapping the last of the bars in linen. She checked each one twice, the scent, the shape, the smoothness of the edges. They were good, not perfect, but good. She placed them into the woven basket, nestled between straw and sprigs of dried thyme. Jurij sat at the bench, sharpening his old knife. He hadn't spoken much that morning, but when she fastened the lid on the basket, he finally looked up. "You remember the price?" She nodded. 2 for plain, 3 for scented, and if they ask for lavender, tell them it's strong, this season, worth the extra coin. He leaned back, studying her. Not a child anymore. Still thin, still wide-eyed, but steadier now. The kind of steady that doesn't show in the face, but in the way a hand no longer trembles over boiling fat. He didn't offer a blessing, just handed her the coin pouch. She slipped it into her pocket and turned to the door. The village square was already stirring by the time she arrived. The bread seller was arranging rolls. A tanner shouted prices across the road. Children chased chickens between stalls. The old wood and barrel stand that had always belonged to Jurij stood empty, except now for her. She took a breath and set down the basket. No one looked. For the first hour, she said nothing, just stood, watched, waited. People passed. Some glanced at her, a girl standing where the old man used to be, and moved on. One woman stopped, sniffed the air, then kept walking. Maëlle felt the pressure in her chest tighten. She glanced down at the bars, neatly wrapped, carefully, cut. The scent of lavender rising gently in the breeze. Still. No one came. Then a voice from behind her, cracked and familiar. "You're the one who worked with old Jurij, aren't you?" Maëlle turned. An old woman in a faded green shawl squinted at her. Her eyes were sharp, her hands knotted with time. "Yes," Maëlle said. "He taught me." The woman stepped closer, picked up a bar, unwrapped it, sniffed. "This smells like the ones he made for my daughter's wedding," she said. Maëlle said nothing. The woman held it to her nose again. "Maybe better," she added, and placed 2 coins on the table. Maëlle blinked, nodded, tucked the coins into the pouch. After that, something shifted. A man asked if she had lemon balm. A mother wanted a bar for her baby's bath. A girl with ink-stained fingers asked if the lavender would stain her skin. One by one they came, not in crowds, but enough. Near midday, a tall man in a clean vest approached. He lifted a bar, turned it over, sniffed once. "Jurij still working?" he asked. Maëlle straightened. "No," she said. "He's home." The man nodded. "So, these his?" She hesitated, then looked him in the eye. "No," she said. "They're mine." He raised an eyebrow. She smiled. "But I keep his fire." He nodded once, then bought 3. By the time the sun leaned westward, her basket was nearly empty. The scent of soap lingered in the folds of her sleeves. Her fingers smelled like mint and ash. And in her pouch, more coins than she had ever held in her life. She walked back slower than usual. When she opened the door to the hut, the fire had already been lit. Gervais stood by the window, back to her, slicing dried herbs for tomorrow's batch. He didn't turn around. Well, she placed the pouch on the bench. Full. He didn't look at it. Any complaints? None. Any lies? Only a small one. Now he turned. Oh? She smiled. I told them I made it all myself. He studied her for a long moment, then gave the smallest of nods. That one, he said, you're allowed to keep. She set the basket down. The fire crackled softly, and behind her, the scent of lavender and smoke lingered as if someone who had been there all along had just walked past once more. Tonight, as the darkness settles deeper and your breath slows like embers drifting low, Santa will tell you a story about walking into places where your name means nothing. Your work is unknown, and all you carry is what your hands can prove. Some journeys begin not with footsteps, but with doubt. It was the first time Maëlle had ever left the valley alone. The invitation had come on worn parchment, ink faded but polite. The village of Fontenay seeks a soapmaker for the upcoming festival. We request a small batch for our infirmary and homes. Delivery by hand preferred. Gervais had looked at the note, then at her. You'll go, he said. Me? She asked. Why not you? He held up his left hand, stiff at the knuckles now, thumb wrapped in linen. They didn't ask for me. He said it with no sorrow, just certainty. So she packed the bars in a wooden box, not many, 24 in total. 12 plain, 6 rosemary, 6 thyme. She folded clean cloth between each row, placed her stirring stick atop the lid like a blade in a sheath, and tied it shut. The walk took 3 hours. Fontenay was smaller than her village, but busier. The roads were lined with wagons. Smoke curled from chimneys. People moved in quick, distracted lines. No one looked up. She stopped outside the meeting hall. A woman in a blue shawl approached, arms crossed. You're the soap girl? The woman asked. Maëlle nodded. Where's the old man? He sent me, Maëlle replied. The woman sniffed. You made these? Yes. She led Maëlle to a small market square where a stall had been cleared for her. 2 boards, 1 crate, no awning. The spot was near a tannery. The smell was heavy. Sour hides and old ash. A poor place for soap. Still, she unpacked the bars. No one came. An hour passed. Then 2. A pair of children walked by, pointed and giggled. One whispered, That's not the soap man. Another said, Too small to stir a pot. Maëlle said nothing. She glanced down at her hands, which now looked too clean, too soft. Doubt crept in with the midday breeze. She wondered if this was a mistake, if she had overstepped, if the fire she carried would only warm her own hut, never beyond it. At midday, an old man in a brown cap hobbled past. He paused. His eyes narrowed. He picked up a bar, turned it over, sniffed. Then he looked up. Where'd you learn this? He asked. From Gervais, she replied. He stared harder. The same Gervais who used to sell soap in Saint-Martel? She nodded. The man smiled. I bought soap from him 15 years ago. Thought it was the best I'd ever had. He held the bar closer to his nose. Smells just like his. She didn't speak. He placed 2 coins on the crate, tapped the wood with his knuckle. Your hand's got his ghost in 'em, girl. He walked off, and something changed. The woman in the blue shawl returned, picked up a bar, sniffed again. This is rosemary? She asked. Yes. She bought 2. Later, a young man came asking for something not too sharp. His hands cracked from working leather. Maëlle offered him the plain goat fat bar. He bought 5. By late afternoon, more had come. Curious first, then convinced. No one asked her age again. No one asked for the old man. They asked how she cured the bars, how long she let them set, whether she used pig or cow fat, whether she'd consider returning next month. One girl, no older than 10, asked if she could touch the soap. Mel handed her a bar. "It smells like sleeping outside." The girl whispered, and Mael smiled. She sold out before sunset. The woman in the blue shawl returned again as she packed up. "Didn't expect much," she admitted. "But you held your place." Mael nodded. She didn't need more. She walked home in dusk light. The road curved behind hills where shadows stretched long. Her arms ached from the weight of the empty crate, but she felt taller. When she reached the hut, Jurij was asleep by the fire. She placed the coin pouch on the shelf. Didn't wake him, but in the softest voice she said, "They asked for you, but they left with me." Then she sat by the fire and added a log, and the flame rose, steady as ever. "Tonight, as the darkness settles deeper and your breath slows like embers drifting low, Santa will tell you a story about walking into places where your name means nothing. Your work is unknown, and all you carry is what your hands can prove. Some journeys begin not with footsteps, but with doubt." It was the first time Mael had ever left the valley alone. The invitation had come on worn parchment, ink faded but polite. "The village of Fontenay seeks a soapmaker for the upcoming festival. We request a small batch for our infirmary and homes. Delivery by hand preferred." Jurij had looked at the note, then at her. "You'll go," he said. "Me?" she asked. "Why not you?" He held up his left hand, stiff at the knuckles now, thumb wrapped in linen. "They didn't ask for me." He said it with no sorrow, just certainty. So she packed the bars in a wooden box. Not many, 24 in total. 12 plain, 6 rosemary, 6 thyme. She folded clean cloth between each row, placed her stirring stick atop the lid like a blade in a sheath, and tied it shut. The walk took 3 hours. Fontenay was smaller than her village, but busier. The roads were lined with wagons. Smoke curled from chimneys. People moved in quick, distracted lines. No one looked up. She stopped outside the meeting hall. A woman in a blue shawl approached, arms crossed. "You're the soap girl?" the woman asked. Mel nodded. "Where's the old man?" "He sent me," Mael replied. The woman sniffed. "You made these?" "Yes." She led Mael to a small market square where a stall had been cleared for her. 2 boards, 1 crate, no awning. The spot was near a tannery. The smell was heavy. Sour hides and old ash. A poor place for soap. Still, she unpacked the bars. No one came. An hour passed, then 2. A pair of children walked by, pointed and giggled. One whispered, "That's not the soap man." Another said, "Too small to stir a pot." Mael said nothing. She glanced down at her hands, which now looked too clean, too soft. Doubt crept in with the midday breeze. She wondered if this was a mistake. If she had overstepped, if the fire she carried would only warm her own hut, never beyond it. At midday, an old man in a brown cap hobbled past. He paused. His eyes narrowed. He picked up a bar, turned it over, sniffed. Then he looked up. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked. "From Jurij," she replied. He stared harder. "The same Jurij who used to sell soap in Saint-Martel?" She nodded. The man smiled. "I bought soap from him 15 years ago. Thought it was the best I'd ever had." He held the bar closer to his nose. "Smells just like his." She didn't speak. He placed 2 coins on the crate. Tapped the wood with his knuckle. "Your hand's got his ghost in 'em, girl." He walked off. And something changed. The woman in the blue shawl returned. Picked up a bar. Sniffed again. "This is rosemary?" she asked. "Yes." She bought 2. Later, a young man came asking for something not too sharp. His hands cracked from working leather. Mael offered him the plain goat fat bar. He bought 5. By late afternoon, more had come. Curious first, then convinced. No one asked her age again. No one asked for the old man. They asked how she cured the bars, how long she let them set, whether she used pig or cow fat, whether she'd consider returning next month. One girl, no older than 10, asked if she could touch the soap. Maëlle handed her a bar. "It smells like sleeping outside," the girl whispered, and Maëlle smiled. She sold out before sunset. The woman in the blue shawl returned again as she packed up. "Didn't expect much," she admitted. "But you held your place." Maëlle nodded. She didn't need more. She walked home in dusk light. The road curved behind hills where shadows stretched long. Her arms ached from the weight of the empty crate, but she felt taller. When she reached the hut, Jurij was asleep by the fire. She placed the coin pouch on the shelf. Didn't wake him, but in the softest voice, she said, "They asked for you, but they left with me." Then she sat by the fire and added a log. And the flame rose, steady as ever. Tonight. As the wind moves slowly through the trees and the world leans into another dream, Santa will tell you about partings. Not the ones with fanfare or long speeches, but the kind made with quiet steps, one bag, and a door left ajar. Sometimes goodbyes don't sound like goodbyes. They sound like silence. Jurij had been quieter in the last few weeks. Not sick, not fading, just quieter. He no longer walked as far as he used to, no longer inspected every batch Maëlle made. His hands still worked, but they moved more like leaves drifting in late autumn. Not rushed, not tired, just finishing their motion. Every morning, he sat, longer by the window. The bench where he used to cure soap was now mostly hers. He carved fewer handles, tied fewer bundles. Some days he simply stared at the fire and smiled. Maëlle had noticed. She just didn't ask. Not yet. One evening, as twilight hung like mist over the trees, she caught him sitting outside looking at the horizon. "I used to think I had more time," he said suddenly. She sat beside him. "You still do," he chuckled. "No, not time to live. I mean time to leave. Time to stop when I chose." She didn't reply. "I think it's coming. Not because something's wrong, just because it's time." That night he sharpened his old knife, polished the stirring stick he hadn't touched in months, rolled up his satchel, and placed a single, wrapped bar of soap beside it. At dawn, Maëlle woke to find him already dressed, sitting by the door. He wore his oldest traveling cloak, patched at the elbow, and boots that had walked through more seasons than most roads. "Where are you going?" she asked. He looked up at her. There was no heaviness in his eyes, just lightness, like something had finally let go. "I thought I would visit the coast." She blinked. "The sea?" Alaric once told me that salt wind teaches a man what he smells like when he's clean of all other scents. I've never felt that. Maybe it's time. He stood, adjusted the strap of his satchel, reached into it and pulled out a square of parchment. "If I come back, you'll still be here," he said, placing the folded note on the bench. "And if I don't, you still will be." Maëlle opened her mouth, but no words came. Just a shallow breath. He turned, stepped through the door, and paused one last time. "Keep the fire." Then he left. She didn't run after him, didn't cry. Instead, she cleaned the bench, lit the fire, stirred a small batch in silence. The days that followed stretched like old cloth, quiet, clean. Her hands moved as they always had, but the air felt different, lighter in some corners, heavier in others. She still made soap, still sold at market, still hung lavender to dry. But she checked the road each evening. Just once, the folded parchment sat untouched for nearly a week. When she finally opened it, she found a recipe, written in Jurvey's steady hand. Simple, balanced, not a formula she had seen before. For when you want to make something that feels like a beginning. She read it again, then again. That night, she mixed the batch, Goat tallow, ash from the back orchard. No herbs, just a little salt. It cured slowly, pale but smooth. The scent was almost nothing. Faint, clean. But beneath it was something else. A note she couldn't name. She sniffed again. It smelled like the wind, from far off. Like stories never told. She wrapped the bar and placed it on the windowsill. One in the drawer, one in her apron pocket, one set aside, in case the wind ever brought him back. In the following weeks, she reorganized the hut. Not to change it, to carry it forward. She sanded the stool by the window, but left it in its place. She oiled the stirring stick. She carved her initials, small, neat, into the underside of the soap bench. Not over Gervais' mark. Beside, if visitors still asked for him, she only smiled. He taught me how to keep the fire, she said. Now I tend it for both of us. One morning, a letter arrived by courier. From a town farther north near the edge of the salt plains. It said only, "To the woman who now tends what was once mine. Thank you. The sea smells as strange as promised. My hands are still clean. I sleep well. G." She folded the letter, placed it inside the drawer with the recipe, and returned to the fire. It was time to make another batch, one for the next pair of hands. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the hush of night folds around your heart like linen fresh from the line, Santa will tell you a story of beginning again. Not from scratch, but from embers. Some flames are born wild, others are passed, hand to hand, from one soul to the next, like secrets whispered under breath. It had been nearly a year since Gervais left. Mael had not counted the days, not precisely, but the rhythm of seasons marked time in soap batches, not in numbers. Lavender bloomed, dried, and was ground. Mint came and went. Applewood ash turned soft and white before the frost. She worked alone, and never alone. The bench still bore Gervais's carved mark. The stool still creaked by the window. His note stayed folded, unyellowed in the drawer. Customers no longer asked for him. They came for her now. Not the girl, just Mael. The woman who made soap that lasted longer, felt gentler, healed cracked skin like summer after winter. She had not thought of teaching. Not until the morning the boy showed up. He was maybe 9 or 10. A slip of a thing. Mud on his boots. A hat too big for his head. He didn't knock. Just stood by the hut's open window and watched. She caught his eyes in the reflection of the metal pot. "You lost?" she asked without turning. He shook his head. "I'm waiting," he said. "For what?" "For you to stir." She turned then, faced him full. He didn't flinch, just stared at the fire, then the bench, then the stack of soap curing in the corner. "I've seen you sell at market," he said. "You don't talk much, but they come back, always." She said nothing. "I want to know why." She raised an eyebrow. "You want to learn soap making?" He shook his head. "I want to learn why it matters." She paused. That was new, not how, not how much, not can I, why. She nodded toward the bench. "Wipe that down," she said. "Cloth's in the jar." He blinked, then moved. It began like that. The boy's name was Lucian. He lived with his aunt, who made cords from flax. He hated weaving, said it made his fingers itch. Soap didn't. After the first week, he came back with cleaner nails and a notebook. He asked too many questions. What if we used oak ash? What if we froze the fat first? "Why don't you ever whistle while you work?" she answered. Some. Ignored others. But she never sent him away. In time, he stopped asking so much and started watching more. He learned how to test lye without spilling, how to stir with weight in the wrist, not the shoulder, how to wrap a bar so it didn't crease at the corners, how to trim when the edge was too soft. He burned himself once, barely a splash, flinched, bit back a cry. She bandaged it, didn't scold, just handed him the soap knife. "Pain makes clean hands," she said. He nodded. By autumn, he stirred his first batch alone. It wasn't perfect. Too much time. Too soft to stack. But it cured. And when he handed her the first bar, wrapped clumsily in folded linen, she didn't laugh. She placed it on the windowsill, right next to the last one Jurij had left behind. That night, she sat by. The fire. Lucienne asleep by the hearth. She didn't write a recipe. She didn't carve a name. She just whispered, not to him, but to the room. "It begins again." And the fire answered, as it always had. "Tonight." As snow begins to fall beyond your windows, and the world curls inward like a cat beside a hearth, Santa will tell you of a final ember. One that didn't go out. Not because someone kept feeding it, but because it knew how to feed itself. It had been many years since Maëlle had first stepped into the hut, uncertain, silent, and small. She no longer felt any of those things. Her back ached more. Her eyes squinted when threading twine. Her hair had silver in it now, though the soap never told. It still cured just the same. And Lucien, once barely tall enough to peek over, the boiling pot now reached shelves she no longer could. He still worked quietly, still asked questions, though fewer and better. He had begun carving his own molds, blending strange herbs she hadn't thought to try. One smelled like wet bark, another like lemon and iron. Customers noticed. They asked, "Is this yours or the boys'?" And she would smile. "Mine," she'd say. But his hands made it. That winter, they made fewer batches. The snow came early, thick and insistent. The path to the market was often too slick for carts, but the hut stayed warm, always warm. The fire had never gone out, not in decades. One night, Maëlle stood at the door. Lucien was asleep by the bench, curled in the old quilt she had once used when Jurij was away. The hut was quiet, save for the soft whisper of wind beneath, the shutters. She stepped outside. The stars were low, heavy, as if pressing their weight down upon the earth. She walked to the tree at the edge of the clearing, the applewood tree, the one Jurij had planted the year she had made her first solo batch. It was bare now, branches gnarled like old hands, but still it stood. She knelt and placed a small wrapped bar at the base. Goat tallow, ash from the hearth, a whisper of rosemary. No one would find it. It wasn't meant to be found. It was just left. She stayed there a while, not thinking, not hoping, just breathing. Then she stood, slowly, and returned to the hut. Inside, the fire flickered low. She added 2 logs. It flared, bright but calm. Lucien stirred, sat up, rubbed his eyes. "You should sleep," he murmured. "I will," she said. "Soon." She looked around the hut, the shelf lined with folded bars, the bench worn smooth with time, the stirring stick leaning in its corner like a patient friend. Her eyes fell on the drawer. She opened it. Inside, 3 things. A folded parchment from Jurij, now softened at the creases. A recipe written in her own hand, long faded, and a square of fresh paper, blank. She took that last one and, "Sut, to the one who comes next, this fire is not mine. It was never mine. I was only its keeper, for a time. If you are reading this, stir slowly, burn steady, and remember, even silence can be clean. M." She folded it, placed it in the drawer, then turned to the fire. Lucien had already added another log. She sat beside him, and together they watched it burn. Outside, snow fell softly. Inside, nothing ended. And that is how the fire lived on, Not in stories, but in hands, in ash, in bars left on windowsills, in those who kept it and those who came next. It had been many years since Jurij left, and many more since Alaric had stood beside a fire no one remembered but Maëlle. And now she too had gray at her temples, her steps slower, her days quieter. But the hut had never gone cold. The world outside had changed. The fields bore new paths. The market square had a wooden sign with her name etched at the corner, though she had never asked for it. The children who once called her the girl who makes soap now brought their own children to watch her work. And Lucian, now taller than the doorframe, often stirred the pot before she rose each morning. But there were still days, quiet, golden days, when she woke before the smoke had stirred, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and sat beside the fire alone. She didn't speak. She listened to the creak of the bench, the hiss of distant wind, the echo of memories not gone, just resting. It was on such a morning that she wrote a letter. No one saw her do it. She didn't sign her name. She placed it in a jar, sealed it with wax, and buried it under the apple tree. The letter read, "If you find this, it means you are looking. If you are looking, it means the fire still matters. The hands that came before me taught not how to make soap, but how to wait, how to listen, how to give care without voice. The fire you keep is not yours. It was never mine. It will never be theirs. It belongs to the moment a bar touches cracked skin, to the smell that reminds someone they are human. Tend it gently. Let it change. Let it burn bright or soft or strange. But never let it go out. Not for the sake of the soap, for the sake of what it teaches. And a keeper." She never told Lucien about the letter. She didn't need to, because by then he had already taken in 2 apprentices of his own. A girl named Elaine, with a burn scar on her wrist and a gift for wrapping, linen clean and fast. And a boy named Joel, who said little, but once spent 4 hours listening to Fat Render just to learn its rhythms. Mel let them learn without stepping in. She had learned that long ago. The most sacred part of the fire is the space it gives others to grow. One snowy evening, she stepped outside the hut with Lucian and stared at the chimney. The smoke curled upward like a memory remembering itself. "Do you ever miss him?" Lucian asked. She knew who he meant. She smiled. "I never stopped carrying him." Lucian was quiet a while. Then, "What about you? Will you leave too?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the stars, then at the hut, and said, "Not while the fire still needs me." That night, Lucian added the last log. The flame rose high, not wild, but certain, and Maëlle, from her place by the window, whispered the final words of her teacher. Words she had never written down, words that had no author but always felt true. Let the soap cure, let the fire speak, and let your silence be a gift. And somewhere, far away, in another village by another hearth, lit by hands not yet born, someone would one day feel a scent they couldn't name, a warmth they didn't ask for, a bar pressed gently into their palm, and without knowing why, they would begin to stir, and the fire would rise again,